Hey, welcome back, folks. This is Johnny the Historian here. Now, we left off discussing last time about nationalism. What nationalism is, what's the difference between nationalism and patriotism. A little bit of what ancient and all the building blocks of nationalism through Greek, Rome, Middle Ages, up to when it was solidified and really concrete and carved in the stone of what modern nationalism is through the French Revolution and Napoleon. And that's where we're at right now, because we're going to discuss the French Revolution, where all the building blocks came together, or the seeds were planted, and they had the right fertilizer to sprout what we know today as modern nationalism, which ultimately shaped the world that we live in today. Most people, the common person, I guarantee you never sit there and think about it. But I have studied nationalism for well over 20 years, and I still steep myself into it. I have many times have gone into it and got lost in it. Okay? Alright? But remember, nationalism really comes out of the French Revolution, and Napoleon really seizes it and solidifies it as a solid unit and ideology to build the Napoleonic Empire, or, well, to build his empire. Alright? So, he really fundamentally in that. Now, as you know from high school, you should remember the French Revolution. You should know this pretty well. 1789 to 1799. 10 years of revolution. We're not going to look at the revolution itself. We're just looking at the concepts of nationalism within the revolution. Alright? Now, this was a really turning point, the revolution within itself, within France. And it was a shift of loyalty. And, well, a shift in loyalty, not of loyalty, but a shift in loyalty. People began to actually identify themselves with a geographical region called France. Remember, when the feudal system, it was all carved up throughout Europe, right? You had pretty much, just like Greece, a bunch of city-states scattered across, right? People usually associated themselves with the feudal lord. Despite those feudal lords would associate themselves with one king, with one geographical region, in this case, France, right? That was starting to melt away, right? A new thing was starting to forge and to grow out of the ruins of the old world. But out of the old feudal world, that was just like horrific. Alright? Horrific. In so many aspects. Alright? Now, the idea of rather than loyalty to a local lord or a feudal lord or to a king, they started to see themselves as basically citizens. Okay? Basically citizens that shared the same rights and had entirely the same language and history and all of these things that they could share and had commonality in. But destiny, fate, this was a massive turning point among the common people, and this is what our ancestors used to go through. Alright? We owe a lot to the French Revolution, but like in every revolution, there's a lot of good things that come out of it. There's a lot of bad things that come out of it. Right? Take the good with the bad. There's a lot of positive and negative effects. This is common sense. There's nothing on this planet that I'm aware of, maybe one or two things, that are entirely negative or entirely positive. Okay? You gotta face the truth. You gotta face the music. That's the idea of a historian. Now, if you're going to get into history, that's great. More power to you. But you got to remember that. And because of all this, anyway, with the French, they started because they share an identity, a same identity. And a very historical identity as well. History becomes a very important thing. And a very important tool for nationalism. Now, you could take the negative of it. Well, that means we should... Well, you go to those libtards and those woke and millennial... I'm going to say it. Fuckers. So, I just loathe them. You know, I shouldn't hate, right? But I hate these people. Loathe them. Entirely loathe them. But anyways, one thing about the revolution that did, it actually fostered. It actually started to foster and, kind of child-rearing aspect of an idea of culture, language, the sense of belonging as a massive group that they all consider themselves as citizens of France. Now remember, the concept of citizenship came back to Rome. That's why we discussed Rome. That's why I kind of mentioned Rome in the last video, because of that concept of citizenship. Now, from the social wars to the edict in 212 AD, the idea of citizenship, okay? Put it this way, if you're part of a club, alright, I like to take it as church too. If you just show up to a church, you just go there to worship, alright? Now, then there's guidelines to be a member, right? You gotta be saved, you gotta be baptized, you gotta this, you gotta this. You have obligations to become a member. Now, once you do those things, then you become a member of the church. Or you become a member of that organization, or that committee, or that workplace. You become a member. You kind of feel a part of a team. You're not just there hanging the hell out. You're not feel like a third wheel. You're part of something, right? Well, take that and apply it to not just hundreds or thousands, millions of people. All right, y'all share the same everything: language, culture, customs, traditions, religion, all the characteristics of nationalism. So, you have all this. You have this fostered idea, and the revolution really does that because people are fighting for the same thing. At the same time as they're fighting for the rights, their freedoms, they're even, you got to remember, it started off with starvation. They're fighting for food, basically. Give them cake or death. Death or cake. Well, that's a hard one. I'll take death, please. Now, oh wait. No, I'm good. But if you have too much cake, man, wouldn't you get diabetes and die anyway? What's a better way to go? Bring on the cake. I'm just not going to die, get beheaded now. I want the cake. I'm going to eat it, eat, gorge myself, and pretty much create one of the gluttony sin. And they get diabetes and, go into a diabetic coma, and then that'd be the end of it. Good way to go. Good way to go. And I love to eat. And I love my sweets. I know it will be the death of me, but there's a lot of things I know will be the death of me. I already foresaw that. Now, one thing too about the French Revolution that I love is the fact that concept of, now during the Roman Republic, the Roman Empire, and all this, and throughout a lot of empires, is the concept of a national symbol. Well, symbols and songs especially start to come into the French Revolution, as much as slogans and logos. This is something. Now, you don't really think of it nowadays. You really don't, because it's so integrated and it's so inwoven into our society that we don't think about it. We just don't, right? We just don't really think about it. So, it's like we don't need to think about it, right? But guys, it's something else to think, right? Symbols. Now, one thing about the French Revolution that comes out of the French Revolution is the tricolored flag. What you see as the flag of France today, right? Din, din, din. Alright? White, red, and blue. Alright? Now, these all had symbolic values, right? So, yeah, sorry about that. And there, my throat, still there. Anyway. So, all the national symbols and the flag, something to give a symbol to unify around, right? It suggested everything that the revolution was going for. Then, pardon my French, then you had the La La Maze. Alright, I think it's called in French. But it became a very powerful icon and an iconic song and an anthem for the revolution. People would sing it. And one thing about music, we've really seen a lot in the last 100 years. How much music affected society. You think music's always been around, but not like it is today. Everybody hears it. All the genres of music today. Right? You can get it like that. Put on the radio. Music. It's everywhere. Every jingle, everything. It's catchy to the human psyche, isn't it? How did something such like this play on our brains? Our own creation. You know? And we just love it. Music, as pretty much today, is normal. Alright? It's as normal as breathing. You know? You gotta think back then, not many people heard music. Or did music. So when you did hear it, it was just like, oh yeah, you just floated to it. Right? It was like the smell of a woman. I'm telling you. History is a woman. I wouldn't even care if she had an STD. I would get an STD. And I would marry her. History is something else, isn't it? But anyway. Right? Just soothing. Now, the thing is... Ow. I gotta fix my belt to tell you that. But anyway, next little short break I will. So, people's sovereignty. It's the next thing I want to tackle. Is the idea that the power derived from the people. And the people equaled the nation. Alright? Not a feudal lord. Not an allegiance or loyalty to a king. But a nation. The concept of a nation. Now, nations did exist after, remember, 1848, which we are going to be discussing later on. Okay? Springtime of nations. But, we'll get into that. But this is where it all fosters the idea of a nation. It's different. Right? A whole group of people that share common interests. Similar, alright? All and much so. You think today you wouldn't think of it. But back then it's revolutionary in itself, and it's because of what it is today is why the world is the way the world is today. Okay? So you gotta keep that in mind. Alright? And the concept of divine right. Okay? When it came to the king, it became a central feature in a lot of senses to a nation, to the concept of a nation at this time. Because monarchy was really dear, but at the same time, they didn't really want it, right? They wanted a republic, and that's what France wanted, a republic. France went through a time like Rome did, but reversed, all right? At one time, the Republic became an empire in Rome. But this time, it was empire back to Republic. It's kind of reversed the tails. So, just like an addict, France is going to go back and forth. It's going to relapse a couple times for monarchy for the next 100 years. And pretty much 80 years. They're going to be... they're going to go through withdrawals. They're going to be... then they're going to relapse back into monarchy. They're an addict for their monarchy, and they're an addict, right? So, this is how it forms, and it plays a very important role in the origins of the First World War. So, now, the other thing is what nationalism really does is it rallies the concepts of, they classify themselves as citizens. Now, they want to defend the Republic. This comes out of the French Revolution. And it raveled during it. We're citizens. We have to defend not just our homeland, that territorial area, right? Which is a part of nationalism, one of the key characteristics, right? This geographical area that we live in. But we want to defend it. We want to defend everything that we all share. Right? Protection in numbers, strength in numbers. Well, this is what actually takes effect. Now, when the Republic developed itself, it did militarize and mobilize for war, okay, as a nation and part of citizenship, all right, against other foreign monarchies, because our monarchy, or our republic, when it comes to France, was better than yours. Superiority starts to kick in, especially for the French. Well, not much has changed. Let's take a look at Quebec. Right? So, they think they're better than everybody else, because we're French and we do care in Quebec. So, this is how it goes. You have that persona. Well, just to put on the persona, to strengthen an army is something else. Now, an army needs to be pretty much unified, fighting for the same reason, defending your homeland, defending your family, defending your values. One thing about war, it kind of brings those things out, okay? And it really, truly does. And that's the thing about it, and it does. But anyway. Now, for Napoleon, when he comes crowned in 1804, and he lives to the crown period, when he comes back to monarchy, right? Remember, he gets the Pope to come all the way there. Well, just to sum up, and he takes the crown and puts it on his own head. Very symbolic of what kind of character Napoleon was. He was a military genius even after he came back from Egypt in 1798. Okay? Which was not really a failed conquest, but in a sense, yeah, it was a almost failed conquest. But he comes back to break, and he crowns himself emperor, because the ages of the crown are 1804 to 1814. Okay? Now, you can say right up to Waterloo in No. Because in 1814, he's gone to the first island. His first exile happens, and he comes back, and then you have the Waterloo, and then he's finally defeated, and back to the other island, St. Helena. So, basic overview. I love Napoleon, love to get into him. Someday. We'll get right into him. Now, Napoleon is actually the main catalyst in driving nationalism itself. And as he does it, and I mean as he does it, he spreads nationalism as he builds his empire across Europe. But nationalism also spreads across his empire. Alright? We're not going to look at the Haiti Revolution, but that's a pretty different one later on. But I'm going to have to wait until I can't fix that sun right now. So I'm going to have to wait. So, back in a bit. Now, okay, sorry about that. I had to wait for that sun to go and try to fix... anyways. So, basically, early morning, right? Early morning. This is right off the get-go in the morning. So, anywho's. Remember the promotion of pretty much the main slogan? The main ideas of the French Revolution? Fraternity. Equality. Liberty. Right? Now, it's kind of funny. Same thing kind of comes right out of the American Revolution. Give me liberty or give me death, right? Liberty was one of these things that just unified people, and equality and fraternity. So these were your three main courses, if you will. Your three main courses that spread across Europe. Now, because of the Napoleonic armies and the Imperial Army marching across Europe. And these ideas was spread by Napoleon's soldiers. And when he built the empire, free range among citizens within those nations that he conquered. So, not Britain. Britain's a little special case. Okay. Ever since the Glorious Revolution. But, besides that aspect, So, what takes place? Now, he spreads nationalism with his imperial army and his troops all the way to Moscow. And everything in between, from Paris to Moscow. Now, here's the beautiful thing, and through the empire, the idea strongly goes about, and it strongly makes its way everywhere it goes. All right? Now, here's the thing. It seems like it's one-sided, don't you think? It really does become one-sided. But here's the thing. I throw the ball on the other side of the court, but here's the thing. In time, that ball is going to come back to my side of the court. All right? We're going to take that analogy here for a second. So Napoleon launches that ball right to Russia. Okay? Now, here's the great thing about this. Now, there's many coalitions during this time that try to put an end to the March of Napoleon. A lot of those coalitions failed into the last ones, okay? I'm not going to get right into it. But I'm going to tell you one thing. We're going to get into the Russian Empire. All right? Now, one thing about nationalism, when it started to come out and evolve itself, the symbols, the character, the shared identity, all those building blocks, that perfect environment for it to foster and to bloom into a beautiful tree that we have today, and we still see the fruits of it all across the world. Nationalism, right? So now Napoleon really does this very well, because he tells his troops, and I gotta put this in, because Napoleon really does it. He spreads it very well. Not just within his Napoleonic laws and his administration, but also his character and everything that came out of the revolution. He wanted to spread the revolution, but just in his way. Very narcissistic that way. Yeah. That's Napoleon, right? So, what Napoleon does, he pretty much convinces the French that, hey, you guys are superior, right? He takes a look at their history. You guys did this. You guys did this. You guys are better. You guys are number one. He just drove it into the French consciousness that they are superior. Just like the Greeks believed that there's Greeks and barbarians. The French were just like, there's French and the rest of you are idiots and morons. We are French. We are better than all of you. And this is pretty much the whole thing about it. And that's how Napoleon did it. And the French loved it. They ate it up. They ate that cake. They didn't choose to death. They ate that cake up. All right? And by this, they're pretty much nationalistic diabetic. All right? All right? By this point, it became almost like a disease. But it wasn't really. It was entrenched into the French consciousness and society and woven into the social fabric of France. And you still see it today. Especially the concept of revolution still exists in France today. The idea of protesting, you have to say the farmers in France do it very, very well. We're going to spread manure, fertilizer, and shit all over your fucking palaces here and all over the politicians' places to get our point across. They do it very well. They did master the concept of revolution. All right? Same as the Russians. They just took a different approach. Speaking of so, the Russians. Now, by 1812, when Napoleon gets to Moscow, okay, we're not going to really get into the Battle of Bernardino or anything like this, okay? We're not going to really get into that, all right? But, as much as I want to, that was a very decisive battle and turning point in European history as much as world history. It's one of those very important battles. Now, Alexander I is pretty much the nemesis of Napoleon. Now, 1801 to 1825. Keep these dates in mind, because we're going to come back to 1825. Now, his successor and son, Nicky, is going to come on a different aspect, okay? But Tsar Alexander I, which reigned from 1801 to 1825, 25 years of reign. He was a very Russian. Okay? Very nomadic, charismatic, young, and very devoted, and very afraid of the new order that was coming into France. Now, gotta remember, when Catherine was before him, when Catherine the Great died, she was pretty much shaking in her britches, or her panties, of keeping an eye on what was going on in France. Alright? It was on the other side of the continent, but she feared for her own empire and the future of Russia. She's seen the future. Especially if you read her memoirs. And I'd love to get into that. That's actually going to be a series that I actually am doing. We'll be definitely going into it. It is awesome, okay? Just a heads up. It is awesome. Alright, the things that she says in her memoirs to debate the events that have happened during her time and why she is the great. And no, she did not love the horsecock, okay? No. There's no evidence, no suggestion, nothing has ever been found yet to this date to suggest that she did that kind of crap. No bestiality. She was a wild woman in the sack and she loved her sex appeal. But not bestiality. Alright, I'm going to keep that right now, right up against. Now, one thing about Alexander, he was really against liberal reforms. This is actually when liberalism actually comes in the French Revolution. This is where liberalism is really born, alright? It is solid, alright? It's unblemished, alright? It's this first generation of liberals, and it got inbred a lot, as we know, because today we got libtardism, alright? So, libinoism, I like to say, too. So, this is where it all starts. This is when liberalism was actually justified. It was actually a brilliant political and social ideology that came out of the French Revolution, okay? But here's the problem. Alright? For Alexander, Tsar Alexander I, he's going to be the counteraction to this. Alright? He's going to be the guy that does not like the ideals, and Russia does not like the ideals that are coming out of the French Revolution and that Napoleon is spreading. Totally anti-matter. Alright? They're going to be the anti-matter against the French Revolution and all the ideas that came out of it. Now, because of this, you have in time the formation of the so-called Holy Alliance. We'll be coming eventually back to that. So, it's September the 26th, 1815, okay? So, you had Emperor Alexander I of Russia. Oh, my bad. Not two. Alright? Emperor Francis I of Austria. And King Ferdinand William III of Prussia. Alright? Coming into an alliance. It was a symbol, and it was an anti-coalition against the ideas of nationalism, liberalism, and socialism, and equality, and fertility, and equality, and the new ways of life. This sets the stage, alright? This is nationalism's enemy, okay? Nationalism starts, why? Well, Prussia, Austria, and Russia are what? They're monarchies. They're also empires. They realized very quickly that nationalism itself, as it was spreading, those ideas were a disease, alright? And it was a cancer to empires, alright? So, they form the conservatism, the old order, the old world order, to keep that going. This becomes very problematic. Now, because of this, the Holy Alliance was very symbolic stand. It really didn't change or have lasting impact on any continental affairs in Europe. But it was a start, and it was a symbol to it. Because Russia at the time, during the Napoleon, after 1812, alright, the swing of the pentacle came from Moscow back into the other court, remember? It's coming back. Alright, the wave went up. That's the far she's going, boys. Just the tip. And it's going to come back. Alright? It went balls deep, it's coming back out. Alright? it starts flooding back from Russia. All right? Then Prussia gets on board. Then the Austrians get on board. And then the Brits get on board. All of this, the Dutch, everybody in the massive coalition before the Battle of Waterloo in 1815. So, this all takes place. Hello. Right? Now, before the Battle of Waterloo, one thing is one of my favorite is the Battle of Leipzig. Alright? Leipzig. Okay? Now, this battle takes place in October 16th to the 19th. Okay? 1813. 1813. What else was going on in 1813? Back to Canada identity. Alright? That year, York got burned to the ground. Now, right? This is why they intertwine. Alright? So, in a lot of senses. Anyway. The War of 1812. Right. Pretty much a lot of pattern recognition. It's just a spider web of connections. Okay. Now, one thing I love about the Battle of Zibzig, I cannot pronounce it right now, but anyway, when that battle takes place, it's also called, aka, the Battle of what? Nations, which is ironic because you have empires in this battle, but it's called the Battle of Nations. It's awesome, but it's a clash of peoples. It's a clash of empires, not really nations. But this is why it's very symbolic, because it also undermined everything that Napoleon was doing. People started now to see that he was defeatable. Now, the Battle of Leipzig was pretty much the start, right? Now, this is after the march back from Moscow. So, this is where Russia really comes into play, all right? Now, in 1814, March the 31st, 1814, Tsar Alexander I, the Russian Tsar of the Russian Empire, marches into Paris. Okay? Now, he stays there for a while. Alright? He stays there for a while. Alright? And he does. So, oh yeah, he does. Now, here's the thing. This is the ideas. Remember what Stalin said. Right? Ideas are more powerful than weapons. And yes, they are. Now, all the Russian soldiers seen the life in Western Europe, Central and Western Europe, and even at the world, what it was like after the French Revolution. They were tainted. Alright? They got a taste of the good life, and they weren't going to go back, my son. They were not going to go back. They were going to go back to Russia and share all this. This is the downside. Russia came in, and Tsar Nicholas, remember, he's anti-liberalism, anti-nationalism, anti-French ideas of the French Revolution. Alright? He's anti of all this, but he comes into Paris, but not even realizing that he's tainting his own soldiers. They're witnessing firsthand the life in Paris and in France, everywhere they go on their marches. They hear the ideas. People talk. This is how it goes. The longer he stayed there, ended the peace and went back, well, all those ideas, the French already took them there. They're like, we're going to go to France and check it out. They go back. The pinnacle swings back to Paris. So you got to go, just like those old credit card machines. Right? So then, the thing is, it goes back again. No, it goes back. And for both sides. So they're tainted, they're back, they see nationalism, and that's the thing, among the ranks, they're all known as, Imperial Russian troops, but they all have different necessities and culture and language in a lot of cases, right? So they take all this back, all these ideas go back. They all go back to the Russian Empire, right? This is very problematic. But at the same time, all these seeds of nationalism were spread, and there's ideas of nationalism. equality, all fertility, all right? Liberty, national self-governance was spread all across Europe, seeded. It's like Napoleon took a handful of seeds and blew it all over the continent. Now, it needed the right environment like it did in France. Remember this. Environmentalism? Well, this is the same thing that's starting to happen. And one thing it does, between the Italians, remember, the French conquered Italy, conquered a lot of the Prussian states in Prussia, right? A lot of the German states. Now, this started to boost German and Italian nationalism, right? They were introduced to these ideas. These spread like wildfire, just like COVID, like plague. It spread, you know? Well, remember, he defined the Rhine Confederation. That sets the stage. Napoleon does get rid of the Holy Roman Empire. Which was, what the hell was that anyway? It was just a title, just a show on a map. But, that's one of the most interesting empires in history. But, when it comes to a lot of things. But for a lot of German and Italian states, they see this idea of nationalism. Well, the French did it. Look what they did. Well, we're better than them. We beat them. See how... now who's better, right? Took a little hit to the prestige of the... We don't care, Les Français. Oui. They took a hit. Alright? It was awesome. Pretty much the same. But hey. Now this started to spark a lot across the European continent, the sense of social, economic, political, cultural, language, logistics, and the list goes on, characteristics of nationalism within groups of people. And a lot of these nations were part of empires and they desired self-governance. Because that was the only way they're going to get their independence and their nationalistic spirit is to become their own nation. Free from oppression and domination from another. Right? The concepts of nationalism. Keep always this in mind. Alright? So, but at the same time, you also had anti-French sentiment. Alright? You had anti-French coalition kind of concept consistently happening. Alright? Then anti-French. Take the Germans. German nationalism starts to take root. And very quickly. Now back to the Tsar and Russia. So all this started to happen with the Italians and the Germans. But here's the other thing. Alright? This is where I want to get into Russia. Alright? Now, when Russia actually steps foot into Paris, okay? They beat the Grand Army in 1812 at the Battle of Bernardino in September of 1812. This actually it becomes a major source of national identity and pride, all right, and unity for even the Russian people themselves, all right, even not just as a nation or a group or a peoples, but also as an empire, right? That nationalistic vibe starts to take place within the Russian people. All right? And after that, because Russia becomes a very major European power for the next couple of decades, right up till the Crimean War, all right? Till it ended, well, in 1853. So, this all takes place during this time period. So 50 years, Russia becomes this massive superpower. And its soldiers also have that sense. But they want to go back and take the liberal ideas back. Right? The republicanism. Right? So it's kind of a tit for tat at this point in time. Especially for the Russians. Because, dude, Alexander was all cool. Tsar Alexander I was all cool with, like, the national unity. You know, that triumphant unity over the Grand Army of Napoleon. But The liberalism, not so much, right? It's like having that beautiful woman. You know, oh, dude, she is just heavenly. And you take that good time. You're like, oh, yeah. But then you come out of it, then you realize, hey, yeah, I got chlamydia. Well, that liberalism and that ideas of equality and fertility and out of the French Revolution that took back to Russia was that STDs for the Russian Empire. Minus the fact that it gave them confidence because it got laid kind of concept with national unity and victory over the Grand Maritime Army and Napoleon's forces. And the defeat of the Napoleonic Empire, they were one of the major power houses that come out of that at the time. That national pride for the Russians. All right, so you got to think many young Russian officers who participate or actually were involved within those campaigns, okay, they decide that it crossed all of Europe and see Europe for what it is. For a young man, for a lot of these young officers, you have to remember, this is a dream come true. They're seeing Europe for free, all right? At the same time, it's very dangerous because they're at war, but not many people, not many Russians left their villages. All right? The concept of Europe was like a fantasy world that they would never see. And for these guys, they've seen everything. They absorbed everything in like a sponge to bring back to Russia, to their own nation and peoples. And that's one thing you got to love about this. All right? And being exposed to the Western ideas of liberalism and constitutional ideas was very threatening to the Russian monarchy and hierarchy within the Russian Empire. Right? You win some, you lose some. Everything has a positive and negative effect depending how you're going to look at it. And so your enemies influence you. I want you to keep that in mind for a second. Just keep it in mind. All right? Now, they just came from republicanism. They witnessed republicanism in a lot of senses and freedom. And these soldiers go back to an autocratic Russia ruled by a monarchy, total opposite, and serfdom still exists. It ain't going to exist up till about 1861, 1862. Okay? In Russia. So you have a lot going on. They witness all this. They're like, why can't we have this in Russia? Why can't I have my cake and eat it too? All right? This is what they're coming back to. You got to remember, they're really stoked. All right? And then therefore, a lot of secret societies started to form. And that was the great thing about, well, a lot of secret societies started to form. One of the interesting ones that actually started to form is the Union of Salvation. And they, oh, this one is something else. But they become the member stages later on until after the reign of Alexander I and the December Revolt, which we'll eventually get to in 1825. And it happens in December. It's one of the gruesome, most interesting pieces of Russian history. And it really, they wanted to establish a constitutional monarchy and end serfdom. That's all they wanted. The same ideas that they witnessed, these same soldiers that came back and did this. Right? They consolidated and contracted and got more and more people, and this is what happens. So they finally took a stand in 1825, December 1825, known as the Decembrists. They stand against the Tsar in St. Petersburg. This is what they demanded. Alright? Well, what do you think's going to happen? Have any idea? Right? So, this was the huge thing. This is the impacts that happened on Russia. Now, what was going back in France? Right? But, we're going to stop there. We're going to get more back into Russia and France in the next episode. More on nationalism, where it came from, and what the effects of nationalism. And especially we're going to see what happens in Russia, what happens in Europe, the positive and negative effects in the next hour. And we're going to talk about more about other things and events that take place. and sets the stage for the development of the 19th century in the world we live in today, the 20th century, as well as the world we live in today. But until next time, just remember, slap a libtard, give him a good old, those woke morons, a little cuff in the side of the head, and tell them, learn your history, bud.